Welcome to the Region of Solutions podcast, where we give you the insider's take on the impactful work and initiatives being undertaken at ESCAP and with our partners. I'm Kavita Sukanandan. So across Asia and the Pacific, 68 million people and $2.3 trillion in infrastructure remain at significant risk from tsunamis. In the Indian Ocean basin alone, thousands of schools, health facilities, power plants, and seaports lie exposed along vulnerable coastlines. Today, more than 75% of high-risk coastal countries have access to tsunami early warning systems, standardized evacuation routes, and vertical shelters, a dramatic improvement from just 25% in 2004. These advancements reflect decades of regional cooperation, community-driven preparedness, and investments in multi-hazard early warning systems. In this episode, we dive into the state of tsunami preparedness today, the role of ESCAP's Tsunami Trust Fund, and the urgent need to address growing risk amplified by climate change. How can we continue to build resilience for coastal communities? And what innovations hold the most promise for the future? Joining us today is Ardito Kodijat, head of the Indian Ocean Tsunami Information Center, and Temily Baker from ESCAP's Disaster Risk Reduction section. Welcome.
Hi, Kavita.
Hi, Kavita. Hi, Temily. Good to see all of you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So to start off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey? What inspired you to work on this area?
Thank you, Kavita. So I'm Ardito Kodijat. Currently, I'm working with UNESCO IOC. I'm based in Jakarta, in Indonesia, and I'm heading the Indian Ocean Tsunami Information Center. So we basically cater the 27 countries in Indian Ocean in terms of capacity building, as well as ensuring the tsunami early warning system is reachable, as well as available, as well as the member states could respond to the warning system very well. My background is actually I'm architect. After the 2004 tsunami, I've become more interested in terms of ensuring the preparedness. So I joined UNESCO in 2006, and since then I'm working on this tsunami early warning system, as well as awareness and preparedness.
That's an interesting career trajectory. Temily, how about you?
I'm also a little bit mixed. Like Ardito, my background was actually civil engineering and anthropology, but I pivoted to humanitarian action when I moved to the Pacific. I did a lot of tropical cyclone housing response work in Fiji after one of the big Category 5 cyclones, and did some work in development and humanitarian coordination with the UN. It was a busy time trying to support countries in disaster response during COVID. The world was locked down. So I think it's really important that we can empower local actors. But here at ESCAP, I am the program manager for ESCAP's Trust Fund for Tsunami Disaster and Climate Preparedness. So it is an absolute honor and joy always to work with Ardito and the team at UNESCO IOC under this program. So I'm really happy to join you today.
Great. And one of the questions we love asking all our guests on the podcast series is, what solutions are you working on for the region?
The solutions that we're working on are really just helping countries to work together through the program in the Trust Fund for Tsunami Disaster and Climate Preparedness. We invest in projects that support disaster preparedness that really does rely on countries to work together. So with the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, it really just showed the world that we need to work together on tsunami warning systems. So really this conversation is one that shows that countries do need to work together to make sure that everyone is prepared.
Great. And Ardito, I think you're a bit more at the forefront. So what solutions are you working on?
Yes, mentioned I'm currently heading the Tsunami Information Center, which is focusing in Indian Ocean. So we basically working closely with the member states, with the donor, with our partners such as ESCAP, in terms of capacity building, in terms of conducting trainings, workshops, engaging with all the member states within Indian Ocean. In addition, because UNESCO IOC was mandated to coordinate in terms of development as well as the coordination of tsunami early warning system globally. So we also engage with the other region. We have a region in Pacific, in Caribbean, as well as in Northeast Atlantic and the Mediterranean. So basically trying to get lesson learned and good practices from the other region, as well as sharing best practices and good lesson learned from Indian Oceans to the other region.
As we saw with the 2004 tsunami, the magnitude is vast and the impact it has on our communities is indeed devastating. Could you explain the current tsunami risk in the region, and why is this region particularly vulnerable?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's important to keep on sharing this. We know that tsunamis are quite infrequent, not like flooding or cyclones, which can happen annually in a lot of places in the world, but tsunamis happen sometimes once in a generation. We look at Asia and the Pacific, and it sits in the middle of all what we call subduction zones, which is where tectonic plates move across each other. And when they're underneath the ocean, that often moves the waves and moves the water onto the land. But we've seen so much devastation, and I think so many people can remember witnessing the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, where nearly 250,000 people lost their lives. And it affected 14 countries across the ocean basin, which was just so extreme. But looking at how Asia and the Pacific is growing and expanding, we know that so much of our population lives along the coastline, and so much of our urban centers are also growing at a very fast rate, and sometimes these are unchecked. So we see a lot of coastal expansion along places that are tsunami prone or tsunami exposed areas that are actually putting people in unsafe situations. When we look at the probabilities of tsunamis happening again, we can see that the devastation might be quite a higher rate than what we've seen in the past. For people, the risk still is very high considering how we live and where we live. That's the perspective that we've seen in ESCAP, and it's something that I think is important that we keep on talking about, considering a lot of these events are not in our personal memories. We haven't necessarily experienced them ourselves, so it's important to continue to share, so it's something that we're reminded of.
Me add to that, I think Pacific is basically, we are in the region of the Ring of Fire. So most of the tsunami actually happens in Pacific. And of course, I think about 80%. Now, in addition to what Temily said about the subduction zone, I think we are now also facing a more complicated tsunami in terms of there are different sources of tsunamis. It's not only the subduction zone, but we also have the tsunami that caused by the volcanic eruptions. We have an example in Pacific, for example, in Tonga, also in Indian Ocean, in Krakatoa. There are also a number of tsunamis that is caused by submarine landslide, which is basically mostly happens locally. But there are also a lot of tsunamis that happens locally, which is only affected a certain part of the country. But as Temily mentioned, most people live in the coastal areas, so most people will be affected either by this region tsunamis or by a local tsunamis. For example, in Indonesia, tsunami within a rule of thumb, usually locally it can happen about 2, 3, 4 years. Another tsunami happens. The last tsunami that happens in Indonesia in 2018. And that's basically because of the volcanic eruptions as well as because of the earthquake that triggered submarine landslide. So, and continues to have a lot of casualties of either loss of life as well as economical loss.
What are some of the lessons that have been learned from recent tsunamis in the past decades? How have they influenced today's disaster preparedness efforts?
I think first, maybe we go back to what Temily mentioned about the 2004. I think in 2004, many people call it a wake-up call. I think in 2004, globally, we only have one tsunami early warning system, which is in the Pacific, which in 2004, they detected about this, and then they tried to provide warning. But again, in 2004, communications and so forth are still weak or lacking of a good coordination. So since 2004, I think improvement have been made. Now, I think globally, there are more than 30 warning systems globally. People always ask, are we safer than 2004? I think, yes, we are safer in 2004 because there is already a system established. But whether we can save everyone, this is something still needs to work on in terms of improving the preparedness, improving the early warning system so that it becomes faster and more accurate. We can address directly to the people who is at risk.
So I'm sure for the 20th anniversary, we heard a lot of tsunami survivor accounts, people who have lived their entire lives by the coast but were not prepared or did not know how to react when, to quote unquote, the monster rose from the sea. What are some of the most effective strategies for empowering local communities? In particular, maybe you could also share how vulnerable and remote areas with limited resources can be better supported in building resilience.
I think the most effective strategies is to look into the local context. For example, in 2004, in an island called Simelu, they have a local knowledge about tsunami because in 1907, there is a big tsunami that happens in that island. So the people learned, and then they have a word that they call smong. So smong is not tsunami. Smong is actually a call for action in terms of if they feel strong earthquake, then they have to go to the hill, higher area. And 2004, when they have this earthquake, because they are one of the closest island to the subduction zone, 75,000 people lived there. Only 7 people died, mostly died because of the earthquake. I think only 2 which is caused by the tsunami. And that's because of they have this local knowledge that they developed. So that's why we try to actually talk to the survivor, documented the survivor, make an education materials, and it becomes a local context education material that is being used.
One of the things that you taught me very early on when we started working together was the concept of self-evacuation being the best preparedness measure. And that really, Kavita, that means that just if you think a tsunami is coming, just evacuate yourself. Don't wait for a warning. Don't wait for the siren. And there's so many different examples of like Ardito says, in a couple of places you have this saying, if it's long and strong, get gone. So if the earthquake is really long and if it's feeling really strong and you're by the coast, evacuate. And it's these little things that, it's not a high-tech solution by any means, but it saves lives.
But for areas that is distant tsunamis, where you don't feel the earthquake, you don't feel the shaking and so forth, then the early warning is very important. I think it has to be complementary in terms of, because sometimes you feel the earthquake and then immediately have to evacuate because there's the self-evacuation protocol. But turn out the earthquake happens inland. So then the early warning system will tell you that, yes, there is a big earthquake, but it happens inland, there is no tsunamis, and so forth. So the nature warning as well as the official warning should be complementary in terms of making it more informative for the people to actually know what's happening and what they have to do. We also develop game-based learning. We develop a game called Runami, which is basically Run from Tsunami, which actually helps people to understand through game learning about how to develop evacuation map, what needs to be considered in terms of developing evacuation plans, procedures, doing exercise, and so forth.
And I can vouch for this. I played these board games, and we actually have one in our ESCAP office that I pull out and put on a table whenever we have our big intergovernmental meetings. So we do the Tsunami board game during the breaks.
So education in a fun manner, I think that definitely sticks to people's minds, maybe a lot more than technical frameworks. Speaking of which, Temily, one of the positive outcomes in the aftermath of the 2004 tsunami was the establishment of ESCAP's multi-donor trust fund for tsunami, disaster and climate preparedness. Could you discuss some of its contributions to date, maybe some of its impactful projects?
Yeah, sure. The trust fund, like you said, started off in 2005, just recognizing that countries need to invest in tsunami warning systems together. And in 2011, after the big Indian Ocean tsunami warning system was operationalized, like Ardito shared, when all countries now share one system together, the trust fund expanded to cover other different disasters, because in Asia and the Pacific we know that disasters and our hazards are transboundary, so they really do need us to work together to have shared solutions. But maybe to share one, if we're going to stick on the tsunami realm, one really great program and that has had some great impacts recently is this program that I do with Ardito in the Northwest Indian Ocean. There's something called the Makran subduction zone there, which is quite close off the coastline of Iran and Pakistan and India. And there were some studies done. We understood that some scientists thought that that subduction zone was locked, which meant that it wasn't really an earthquake seismic risk anymore. And others said that, no, it's still active and we think that this is a tsunami risk for these coastlines. But what we looked at together was the fact that there was a big tsunami here in 1945, and Ardito can probably share more on this because he captured a lot of eyewitness testimonies from this 1945 tsunami. And if we look at a similar tsunami happening today, that's 80 years ago, and you see the coastal urban centers, the infrastructure, the pipelines, the seaports have just absolutely expanded in the last 80 years. So the question we asked ourselves was, may it happen again? And what do we need to do to prepare? So that was, I think, maybe 7-8 years ago between UNESCO and ESCAP, where we started looking at this together and brought together India, Pakistan, Iran, Oman, and UAE as their scientists to come together to really ask that question. Is this a tsunami hazard zone still? And they found yes. And then let's model it. Let's see what would happen today. And let's see where the inundation, so where the white water might flow in different tsunami scenarios. And then now asking the question of, if this happens again, how do we evacuate? So that's been a really long, slow program together, because you're really going from science to different modeling to a lot of capacity building with disaster management authorities, now to the local government to look at the maps of their cities to say, okay, we are to evacuate people. And what's really interesting about this project is it's called a near field tsunami, which just means that you've got about 20 minutes to get away. So it's evacuating entire cities within 20 minutes is a very big ask.
So I understand that another area which the both of you have worked on more recently is the 2024 Tsunami Preparedness Capacity Assessment, which aims to evaluate progress and identify gaps in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Could you share some of the key findings so far and their implications for regional preparedness?
Yeah, sure. This has been a big piece of work that ESCAP has supported UNESCO IOC on, because we have these brilliant tsunami warning systems in the Indian Ocean, which now is just about 20 years since we started, and in the Pacific Ocean, which is marking 60 years into 2025 this year. And looking back, when we speak with our donors and we speak with governments, we ask the question of, how far have they come? What is the progress? But also, where do we need to invest to make sure that these are sustainable? And so we've supported UNESCO IOC to conduct these capacity assessments, looking deep into what is the capacity of these systems, where are the gaps. But two of my major takeaways is that we really do need more local and granular risk assessments at the community level, with communities involved, as well as we need some financing for the operations and maintenance of the system. Takeaways, Ardito.
Yes, I think the capacity assessment from almost a wide angle, from the policy and plans, it should be the national governments needs to actually build that capacity. But I think there are a lot of different priorities that happens in the country. So regional coordination, regional support, regional activities is still very important.
Exactly. One thing that is exciting to me about it is we don't really have a standardized way of measuring tsunami preparedness in a country or in an ocean basin, but now we do. So expanding that, like Ardito said, from the Indian Ocean, that they've developed this methodology. Now we're sharing it with the Pacific Ocean, marking their 60 years. And they've never looked at or done an assessment like this before, so it will be really interesting. But I think also the capacity assessment has been useful. There's a lot of countries, especially in the Pacific Island countries, where tsunami is not really on their list of top priorities. Sometimes it's cyclones or flooding. Sea level rise is big ones. So it's really important for us to be able to use things like these capacity assessments to see where we can work tsunami into existing resilience efforts.
Thank you for those insights. I think it's interesting to hear what's been happening on ground and the great work that your teams have been doing, but also clear that while significant progress has been made, the journey is far from over. Before we wrap up, what's one brief message that you'd like our audiences to remember from this episode?
Tsunami is something that can happen at any time, can happen anywhere in tsunami-prone area. So my key message is be aware, be prepared, and be tsunami ready.
Good one.
That's snappy.
Temily?
And yeah, maybe I'll give a message to my family. From what I've learned at work is you all live in a tsunami prone area, and early warnings save lives. So know your early warning system at home, please, and tell Grandma and Papa. Thank you.
That's all for today's episode of A Region of Solutions. Don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring stories from ESCAP and the Asia Pacific region. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and be part of the solution for our region. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ardito.
Thank you, Kavita. Thanks, Temily.
Thank